In a video of mine on Abraham Zapruder, who took the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination, I used this graphic here and this one to tell my interpretation of the Zapruder story. And in this graphic, the text comes from the Wikipedia entry on Zapruder. At least that was current at the time I made the video. And it says, in 1941, Zapruder moved to Dallas, Texas to work for Nardis, a local sportswear company. In 1949, he co-founded Jennifer Juniors Incorporated, producing the Chalet and Jennifer Juniors brands of dresses. From the summer of 1953 to April 1954, Zapruder worked at Nardis side by side with Jean Lagon. His Jennifer Juniors offices were on the 4th floor of the Daltex building, across the street from the Texas School Book Depository. And on the day of the assassination, he very famously was credited as being the photographer of the Zapruder film that we now know and love today. Now, when I made that video, I was a little uncomfortable putting this here because I knew of no primary source that said that Jean Lagon worked with Abraham Zapruder in person, that they worked side by side. So I was a little uncomfortable with that, but I put it in my video anyway, because Wikipedia is this mainstream media source, really. And I wouldn't think they would say anything controversial like that goes against the mainstream narrative unless it were true. And the reason this seems important to me, that Zapruder knew Jean Lagon, is that Jean Lagon, after they supposedly worked together, married George DeMohrenschildt. And George DeMohrenschildt was Lee Harvey Oswald's best friend, probably, during part of 1962 and the early part of 1963. And DeMohrenschildt also knew George Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, who later went on to become the director of the CIA and the President of the United States. And so the reason this seems so important to me is because this defines a social network which includes George Bush and Abraham Zapruder, connecting Abraham Zapruder, the photographer of the Zapruder film, with George Bush. So you can imagine that my interest was excited when I saw this in the education forum. Zapruder working side by side with Jean Lagon, Debunked, a post by Tony Crome. And if you click on the link, you will see this, which apparently is a post by Tony Crome on some other forum that I'm not familiar with, something called Jax, which has a photo of JFK on it, when JFK was in the Navy, I guess. And Tony Crome says here, I guess someone can head over to Abraham Zapruder's page at Wikipedia and press the edit button. As of April 1949, Zapruder was formerly Nardis production manager. Zapruder and Chaikin, or I guess it's Chaikin, were by then over at 3037 Canton Street in a new apparel firm named Chalet Incorporated. Jean Lagon arrived in Texas in 1953, and he quotes from Jean Lagon's Warren Commission testimony to support that, and he is quoting it accurately. And he says Jean Lagon arrived in Texas in 1953. And then he quotes more of her testimony, which says that she worked for Nardis in the summer of 1953. And then he shows a photograph of Zapruder with Chaikin. He does not identify the source of this information here, and it would be nice if he did, but it looks genuine to me that this is probably from some genuine publication contemporary to the events being described. That is from 1949. though it would be nice to know where it comes from. And the caption here says, organizers of new apparel firm. Chalet Incorporated, manufacturer of Junior and Mrs. Wear Only, is a new Dallas apparel firm organized by Albert Shaken, left, and Abraham Zapruder, right, who are president and secretary-treasurer, respectively, of the company. Another founder is Charles F. Mayer, or Meyer perhaps, vice president. Chalet has begun production with all new equipment in a one-story brick building leased at 3037 Canton Street and containing 6,500 square feet of space for executive offices and display rooms in front of, and cutting, sewing, and shipping departments in the rear. Formerly designer for Nardis Sportswear of Dallas, Mr. Shaken will design the Chalet line of dresses, blouses, skirts, toppers, and sportswear, which will be restricted to one store in each city, including A. Harris and Company in Dallas. Mr. Zapruder, formerly Nardis production manager, is in charge of production for Chalet. So this establishes, apparently, though the date given comes from Tony Cromer, and he doesn't say what the source of this information is, apparently, unless Tony Cromer is presenting some incorrect information here, apparently this proves that Zapruder left Nardis in 1949 and went on to establish this new company. And if you combine that fact with the fact that Jean Lagan told the Warren Commission that she moved to Dallas in 1953, then you come up with this impossibility that's stated in the Wikipedia article that Jean Lagan was working with Zapruder before she had moved to Dallas. So if this information is correct, and I don't think Tony Crome would intentionally misrepresent this, I don't know him, but it would be, if someone else can find the source of this information, he could be so proven to be a liar that I wouldn't think he would take that risk. But who knows? Like I said, I don't know him. If this information is correct, and Zapruder apparently quit working for Nardis in 1949, then he could not have worked with Jean Lagan in 1953 for Nardis. It doesn't prove that Zapruder did not know Jean Lagan or George DeMohrenschildt, but it does prove, if this information is correct, that what is said in Wikipedia is not correct. Now, going back to the Wikipedia article on Zapruder, and I have to do that because the Warren Commission didn't ask Zapruder anything about his earlier life. They asked many witnesses about their earlier lives, but they didn't ask Zapruder that. And if you look up just under where it says early life, it says Zapruder was born to a Ukrainian Jewish family in the city of Kovel, the Russian Empire, now Ukraine, the son of Israel Zapruder. He received only 4 years of formal education in Ukraine. In 1909, his father left for North America. In 1918, Abraham Zapruder left Kovel for Warsaw with his family. At some point, Zapruder's brother was pulled off a train and murdered in front of his family, apparently by Polish guards. In 1920, his family emigrated to the United States, settling in Brooklyn, New York. And then skipping down to the highlighted area, it says in 1941, Zapruder moved to Dallas, Texas, to work for Nardis, a local sportswear company. In 1949, he co-founded Jennifer Juniors Incorporated. So the apparent contradiction exists in this Zapruder article. You would think that whoever's writing this would realize that there is this apparent contradiction, that he could not have worked with Jean Lagan unless he worked with her after 1949. And the fact that he co-founded Jennifer Juniors doesn't necessarily mean he did not work with Jean Lagan at Nardis. People do hold jobs at different places simultaneously And this was common in Dallas at the time, but I don't know of any evidence to say that Zapruder did that. I would think that if he went to start his own company with this Chalet guy, both of them having worked at Nardis, that they would not continue to work at Nardis, that Nardis would not like that, and they would certainly know about it because they would know who their competitors were. So this is probably a genuine contradiction, and probably Ligon could not have worked with Zapruder for Nardis after 1949. But notice that Zapruder was in New York City prior to 1949, and when the Warren Commission interviews Jean Ligon, it's not made clear when she was in New York City, though her daughter was born in New York City, and that would have to have been 1940 or earlier. So both of them lived in New York City at the same time, and Jean Ligon did work for Nardis in New York City, though it doesn't say in her Warren Commission testimony when she started working for Nardis in New York City. The sense of it is that it had to be somewhere around 1953, and that she was assigned to Dallas in 1953, sort of. That's the sense of it, but it's not specifically stated. So it looks to me that according to the available evidence, she could have worked for Nardis while she was in New York City and Zapruder was working for Nardis in Dallas. They wouldn't have been side by side working together, but they could have known each other, both working for the same company. But I can't prove that, of course. The Wikipedia article on Zapruder does give footnotes for the assertion that he worked side by side with Jean Ligon for Nardis in 1953. There's 5 footnotes, 5 sightings there. 8 through 11 do not support the assertion, but are kind of beside the point. And number 12 is the one that supports the assertion that Zapruder worked with Jean Ligon. And if we click on that link, follow that link, it goes here to this webpage, Flashback Dallas, Nardis of Dallas, the fashion connection between the Dick Van Dyke Show and the Kennedy assassination. And on that page it says this, down a little ways: while at Nardis, before he left to start his own clothing company, Zapruder worked with a woman named Jean Ligon, later Jean DeMohrenschildt, who, with her husband George, suspected by some of being a CIA operative, was friends with Lee Harvey Oswald in the early 60s. Yep, that's an interesting head-spinning coincidence. But the source for this information here is not given, so this is apparently the source for the Wikipedia article assertion, and there's no source given here, and I don't see why the author of this piece would know anything on her own. The author is a Paula Boss or Bossy. Seems like she's probably a fashion writer. She's writing about Nardis of Dallas, the fashion connection between the Dick Van Dyke Show and the Kennedy assassination. So this doesn't seem like a very reliable source. So I think Tony Crome, whom I don't know, is probably right about this. That probably Zapruder did not work with Jean Ligon in Dallas in 1953. At least there doesn't seem to be any evidence that he did. And I don't know of any evidence that connects Abraham Zapruder directly to George DeMohrenschildt